All right, everybody, this is another bonus episode of Battleships to Beer. This is Ryan Gibbons, and I'm actually here with a really good friend of ours, and we've already mentioned him in, I think, episode 4, but Christopher Collins, also known as The Wolf. Christopher, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to say, there's no one else that I'd rather be sitting out on the waterfront right now of our Coal Shed Brewery enjoying a beer with at 9 a.m. than you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Cheers to that.
Let's take a sip. All right, so Chris, one of the things, it's actually kind of weird to even call you Chris because I never do, but just to kind of establish it here, let's start with the Wolf. You know, I feel actually pretty honored that I actually named you the Wolf and that you've taken and run with it. But if you remember from Pulp Fiction where it was Harvey Keitel was the Wolf, and it was John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson's character, they had, you know, they were in some deep shit.
Yeah.
And
just blew somebody's head all over the back of a car.
That was the one. And then what was it? Quentin Tarantino had said he had called the Wolf to fix it up, and they said,
"You need to call somebody." You
call the Wolf.
Yeah,
You're in a bind. And I got to tell you, that is exactly who you have been for us. And wide-ranging abilities in what you're able to do, but even more so, you do it with a smile and such great gusto that we love having you around.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
Yeah.
I like solving problems.
You do, and you do it well. You know, and one of my favorite things on your email is what's your signature in your email say?
Oh, you don't tug on Superman's cape.
You just don't tug on Superman's cape because he'll get it done, but not if you tug too hard.
Yeah, don't piss him off.
So we've known you, we were just kind of chatting before we hit record here, but we've known you basically since the beginning, and I don't know if you remember how it started, but I sure do. We were brewing over at Carneros Brewing Company.
Yeah.
And we had just found a cold box that didn't have a compressor or a fan unit on it.
Right.
And we knew Roger Delacroix, or I'm probably butchering his last name, but the gentleman who started Sonoma Gourmet.
Yeah.
And he used to come in damn near every day to Carneros Brewing Company and have a beer. And so, great guy, loved chatting about beer because he is Belgian, if I'm not mistaken. So he definitely knows about his beer. And so anyway, we were chatting with him one day, and I was like, well, hell, this guy's probably got some refrigeration. We were like, hey, do you know anybody that's got a condenser unit? Because we just bought this cold box. He's like, you know what? I've got one. And even more, I got a guy that can put it in. And he is the one that introduced us to you through that. And so not only did we buy the condenser and fan unit, but we gained a Wolf in the process, which has been, priceless.
You guys shoved that walk-in box in that place and put the condensing unit on top. I'm like, we can do this, but all right.
I think the one thing, and so that was when the Coal Shed looked like, like what we always describe as a David Lynch movie.
Yes.
This was back in the day.
Yes.
And we put that in, and damn if you didn't get that thing fired up. And that thing smelled like processed tomatoes for months. Like every time you'd walk in there, it just smelled like stewed tomatoes. But
it kept your beer cold.
It kept the beer cold. That's all that mattered about it. And but one of the things over the years we found out is you've actually got a little bit of history with Mare Island. Is that right?
Yeah. No, I started here.
You started here.
Yeah.
So, where are you from originally?
Napa.
Oh, okay.
Born and raised in Napa.
Okay.
And my dad saw the ad in the paper one morning. And they were advertising for the apprenticeship down here, and he said, "You should go down there, Christopher. You get a job." I was like, "Okay."
Apprenticeship for what? Like what shop or what?
Oh no, they did apprenticeship classes.
Oh, okay.
So you came down and you applied to take the test, and over 4,000 people applied. 2,300 of us qualified to even take the test.
Wow!
And out of the 2,300, they picked 150 people.
And you.
And then I got chosen. The test was really. I was not pretty. They did not only just basic math, higher math, trig, calculus, but they did reading and listening to the point where I remember at one point the guy he's up there at the podium and they gave you a bubble sheet and you got your pencil and he just starts calling out numbers and letters. He's going down and you got to you got to fill in the bubble. Well, he starts getting faster and faster that you can't color in the bubble as fast as he's calling it out. So it's a thing about how you got to figure this out. So people are trying to color in the bubbles, but he's going faster. So I just started dotting the bubbles as he kept calling them out, and then I'd go back after, like when we're doing reading and comprehension stuff, I'd just go back and fill in more bubbles if I finished earlier. When I finished the math, I'd go back and fill in more bubbles. It was a matter of, you got to work this situation so that you can manage it. And I was like, oh, these guys are scary.
Yeah.
It was 4 hours, and I came out of that with a big headache, but I qualified.
And an apprenticeship. Yeah.
So then they interview, they put you into the box basically of people who they've selected, and then you pick 3 shops of the shops that we're hiring, and you get interviews with those 3 shops, and then the shops pick who they want. So I had picked the paint shop because I had done some painting as a kid, and I was like, I could do painting.
Right.
Yeah, and then I picked the heavy mobile equipment, the cranes.
Oh, okay.
Because that's high pay.
Yeah.
You get extra money.
It's pretty sweet to be on these cranes too.
Yeah. If you don't mind heights, it's good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you're what, 6'7"?
6'6".
I was gonna say 6'6", so heights aren't a problem for you.
No, not for me. And then there was the shop 38, the outside machinist. Mm-hmm. And so I interviewed with the crane shop. It didn't seem to go very well. I didn't know much about shivs and cranes and all that.
Sure.
And then I was standing there talking to this guy who was a painter from Mare Island, and he said, what shops are you interviewing with? And I'm like, I picked the crane shop, the paint shop, and the outside machinist. And he was like, you don't want to paint. And I was like, why? He goes, because they'll stick you in a hole. You'll be in there for 9 hours with a mask on your face. It's cramped. You got to reach these places that God only knows where they're at. I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound so good. It's not like painting a house.
Right.
And so I kind of blew off the paint interview, just kind of, I don't know nothing about paint. Yeah, right. And then the last interview was the outside machinist, and he had a bunch of flip cards with machinery tools on them, calipers, micrometers, things like that. And so he started, flipping through the things, saying, tell me if you know the names of these tools. I said, that's a mic, that's a caliper, that's an inside mic. He goes, well, it's a 0 to 1 outside mic. I'm like, okay, you want the technical names for these things? Sure. And then he looks at me and goes, how do you know the names of this stuff? I said, my dad owned a Harley shop in Napa. I've been working on engines since I could pick up tools.
Yeah.
That's just the way that is. And he was like, all right, done with the interview. And they sucked me into shop 38.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then how long were you on the island working under that apprentice program?
Let's see. It's supposed to be a 4-year program, but I think it took 5 because they didn't have enough work to do. That was right at the end when they weren't getting a lot of subs.
Got it.
I think we had the Kamehameha, and we had the triple nickel, and we had one more. I can't remember the name of it. But anyhow, triple nickel was a special sub.
Okay.
Extra thick. Does deep dives.
Gotcha.
And then the Kamehameha, I think they cut that one in half so that we could expand it and put in a space for people.
Right.
To be launched out of.
Okay, so that was part of the Ivy Bells mission. So we actually, that's funny. I didn't realize that you have touched that as well, because in the last bonus episode that I recorded with Steve Togner, he was in the Navy, and he was stationed on the Russell B, the Russell B submarine, and it was part of those missions where they literally, they cut the middle out, like you said, expanded it by 100 feet, and then they would take the subs over into Russian waters, launch guys out of the tubes, and then put listening devices onto the cables that went from Moscow to St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
And they would transcribe everything, bring it back over to Mare Island, and then hand it off to the powers that be.
Right.
And we make a beer, Ivy Bells, because the mission, one of the mission code names was Ivy Bells, and that's our Pilsner that we do out of that. So,
well, one of the things that we were doing. We had another boat that was here. It was at dry dock. No, not in dry dock. It was just on the dock here, and we sunk it.
Yeah.
I can't remember. Not the Thresher. The
Guitaro.
The Guitaro. That was it. We sunk it. Right here.
Yeah, were you part of you weren't part of the ones that sunk it? Yeah,
no, I wasn't in here yet. But they recovered it.
Right.
But that's what we were using for pieces and parts to open up the other one and make things happen. So you'd go onto the Guitaro and you'd remove stuff, and when you pull it out, there was mud behind it.
Still mud behind it. Yeah.
And that boat never ran right ever since. I mean, it was haunted. It was quirky and didn't do what it was supposed to do all the time. It's kind of like one of those cars you got to kick and then turn.
Right. But you don't necessarily want that to happen with a nuclear submarine.
You don't really like that when you're out in the water.
Yeah, probably not. Well, if you remember correctly, you were at our Yardbird party where we released the Mud Puppy beer that is named after the Guitarro, that famous incident that happened here.
Right.
And because what was really special for us about that is we had the plank owners, the ones that were on the commissioning crew here, and then we also had yourself that was part of the decommissioning of it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a full circle moment.
Yeah, I remember that.
And we actually we have the Mud Puppy Brown Ale on right now on draft. But yeah, that's I remember when Kent told me that you were a part of that decommissioning and the mud behind it, because they raised it and they supposedly had cleaned it, but they didn't pull everything off.
Well, they couldn't.
Yeah.
You can't just assemble a whole submarine.
Right. Unless you have to.
Unless you're done with it.
Right. Why would you? And then since then, like, where's that career taking you? What are you doing now?
Well, I finished the apprenticeship and then they shut down Mare Island, and I was working for the heavy mobile equipment. I started working on the cranes because they had put me in a place, where they gave me a magnet and they wanted us to just check for ferrous metal.
Yeah.
We were separating the metals, and I looked at them and I said, I can't do this. I'm going to use up all my sick leave, all my annual leave, and then quit if you don't find me a job where I can do something.
Right. Right.
So I didn't have much in the way of sway. I'm just an apprentice, but we did have a guy named Dave Collins who was a white striper, one of the mucky mucks.
I was going to say, what's a white striper?
Yeah, those are the guys that had the helmets or the hard hats that were gold, and then they'd have a white stripe. So
okay.
Far above your supervisors, they're up there.
Yeah.
And I went over to him and said, hey, Dave, because we'd always joked about us being the same last name, but we didn't know each other.
Right.
Both from the local area. I thought that was weird that we didn't. How many Collinses can you have?
It's not Uncle Dave, huh?
Yeah, it's not Uncle Dave. But I told him, look, man, I don't know what you can do if you have any strings to pull, but I need one. I got to get out of this situation where I'm checking metal or I'm going to blow this whole job off.
Right.
And he made a couple calls, and the next day I was working for the crane department, actually going up on the cranes and oiling the shivs and checking the machinery, which was great because I had something to do. But that's when I was in that shop, and somebody had left already, but they were up at Washington and Everett, Naval Station Everett, and they called back saying they needed an air conditioning and refrigeration mechanic. And so somebody screamed out over the shop, anybody want a job in Washington? And I said, I'll take a job in Washington. So I went up there and I got the information, and then I wrote a resume that included everything that was true about what I had been doing my whole life. But I wrote this one paragraph that included everything I had done about air conditioning and refrigeration, which was a complete lie.
Yeah, you lied on your resume? I've never heard that. Yeah.
And I had picked out, certain words, keywords that I thought that would qualify for, when they analyze the resume, they look for certain words.
Right.
Well, they were in there, and so they called me up and offered me the job. They didn't even interview me.
Wow.
They just called me up and offered me the job, and so I took it, and I moved to Washington, and I thought, well, I've worked on skateboards, motorcycles, cars, and now nuclear aircrafts and nuclear submarines, but
and cranes, and
I'll figure out refrigeration. It'll be okay. So I thought I should read a book on the way up there, but I didn't. And then I thought when I got there, well, I'll pick it up, but I didn't because nobody was working on it. It was a fresh base, and nothing was being reconditioned. It was all, maintenance. And so the guy who's taking me around to show me the equipment, he's like, okay, well, here's the walking box over here. And then he opens up the closet over here. He says, here's the condenser. And I said, well, what's the condenser? And that's like saying, what's an engine?
Right, and you're mechanic.
Yeah. And he was like, what? And so 3 months goes by, and my boss pulls me into to his office, and then I'm thinking, oh, I'm gigged.
Yeah.
And he says, you don't know jack shit about your job. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to get fired.
Finally, somebody...
I've never been fired.
Right.
Damn, here it goes. And then he goes, but I like your attitude. I'll make you a deal. And I was like, yeah. He goes, I'll keep you on as a mechanic, and you find a school on your own time, and you learn your trade. And I see a sharp increase in your skills in a year, or in 6 months, and in a year you're a journeyman. And then I'll just keep paying you as a journeyman. And I said, I can do that. So I found a school. It was a local school in can't name it that town. It was up there in Washington. And it was only $1,500, and they paid for it.
Wow.
It was 15 weeks, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday nights, and every day or every Saturday, all day. But, that was because they needed to teach you electricity, and I was like, I already know the electricity.
Right.
And they needed to teach you the mechanics of compression, and I'm like, I know this stuff. This is not the big deal. The big deal was the gases, and how they react, what they're doing. And once they explained that to me, I'm like, man, this guy was brilliant. The guy that came up with refrigeration, I'm really impressed with that guy.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Johnny Reefer.
Yeah, whoever did that one, I was like, man, that was pretty good. But anyhow, then I succeeded, and they were quite happy.
Yeah.
Until somebody called and wanted me to come down here to work at the VA hospital to do their air conditioning and refrigeration.
Back here on Mare Island.
No, at San Francisco.
Okay.
And so I came back. I was up there, well, I don't know, 8 years, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kent says a story, and you can completely debunk it here, but he said at one point you were doing the refrigeration for the Social Security.
Yes.
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 What was that about?
Well, I was working at the VA hospital, and I got into a tiff with my teammates because they didn't want to share the napkins that we had in the shop for our Thanksgiving dinner with everybody else. No, it was Christmas. I was in charge of making the Christmas party happen, and I'd been to Costco to get a bunch of stuff, and I called back to them and said, hey, how many napkins we got left in our thingy? Because I think we had a bundle of 500, and we only need 100. And that's excessive because there's only 30 people, So I was like, I think we can just use the napkins in the shop. I'm not buying another set. These are our napkins. We can't share napkins.
It's gotten down to that.
Yeah, right. I get back to the shop, and they're like, one of the guys, Vern, he was all ticked off about it, and I'm like, this is. And I left my cheese slid off the cracker. I'm wearing this elf hat, and I grabbed the bags of napkins, and I stormed out of the shop, and I ripped it open over the trash can outside the shop, and I'm throwing napkins. I'm just throwing them, screaming and yelling about your Christmas spirit. You guys are fucking Scrooges, and I just went nuts,
In an elf suit.
And that's just a day later. Ed Brashear had called me from Social Security. He had worked at Mare Island, or at the VA, but he took a job with Social Security, and they needed an air conditioning mechanic. And he said, "I know the guy you want." So he called and said, "Hey, we need you over here." And I said, "That's fine. I'm ready to go."
Yeah. I just threw my fucking my workshop tools, napkins. I'm in my curly bell
just made a
toes.
scene in the parking lot like a bad elf. I gotta get out of here. And I went to work for Social Security in Richmond. They covered all of our accounts for Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. So they're all stored in the computer system there.
Right.
I had to keep it cool.
Right.
Lots of people in the building think you're there to keep them cool, but not the case. I mean, that we told them that we were there to keep them cool, and this makes them feel important. But it's 1,500 people in that building. It's a lot. It's a heat load. But the goal was you don't let those servers get hot.
Right.
If they get warm, alarms go off. I got a job to do.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm noticing a theme that one thing I can say is your value and your worth as an individual and a human being, and even a mechanic, seems to have followed you through all of this. Because it seems like somebody's called you and said, "Hey, I know just the guy."
Yeah.
It was before the wolf was, it was back when you were a little pup. But
it seems to be. People have always seemed to notice that I get really highly focused when I'm chewing on a bone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's been, even back and forth, when I'm fairly mechanically inclined, but I don't have the knowledge you do, but I love like when I have a problem and we can just mash it back and forth on text. And
like that text session we had, I think it was 2 hours.
Yeah, it was easily 2 hours. And it was 5:30. I had just told my wife, "Hey, I'll be home in 15 minutes. I just live 7 minutes up the road."
Yeah.
And so I'm walking out to my car and I noticed that our glycol chiller was at like 57 degrees, and that it's supposed to be at 28, 29 degrees. And so I'm looking at it, I'm trying to give it a little once over, and I was like, man, I gotta call the wolf. And so texted you up, and 7:30, 8 o'clock when I finally got home, and of course I'd let my wife know in the marathon. And she's like, man, what happened? And I said, man, I had to call the wolf. And she said, say no more. She understood that I was in deep if I had to call in the reinforcement.
I was on the couch watching the new Godzilla King Kong movie. I paused it, 'cause it really was not that interesting. But I paused it and just got a beer, and I was like, okay, let's talk. I liked how quickly I could text you.
Yeah.
And you were like, oh, okay. And then I wouldn't have to wait like 10 or 15 minutes. You were like, okay, I'm back. I'm like, oh, you took it apart already?
Yeah.
It's already apart.
No, I was I was deep in the trenches. And, One of the things I always like to bring up too is you and I share a birthday, so
Yes.
we're birthday brothers in that aspect.
Woo-hoo.
And I always enjoy meeting somebody that's born on February 19th. We're cuspers.
Yes.
We're right on the
Yes.
cusp. And what do you consider yourself? Are you more a Pisces, or what's the one before?
I always considered myself an Aquarius.
Aquarius, yeah. So I always considered myself a Pisces. So it's kind of nice, see the dichotomy there.
And I think that the rotation has changed now, and I think we're fully in the Pisces.
Yeah.
I think they changed the dates. Because when I was a kid, it was the 19th, but now I think they've changed Aquarius to end on the 18th, and it might have even changed it to end on the 17th.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So I think
I stopped reading crystals a long time ago,
I
so I'm
know,
not sure.
I know.
I don't even know when Jupiter's in retrograde or any of that anymore. So I'm not sure. One I don't know if you want to dig into it, but one story that we found fascinating from the beginning is your daughter. She's incredible, by the way. She's a fantastic personality, and I love that she's always with you. I mean, she's even with you now here.
Yeah.
But how you want to tell us a little bit about your daughter?
That's it. Well, I didn't know I had a daughter.
No.
Yeah. It turns out that I had met a lady down in, thank you.
Yeah.
Down in Miami, and we had carried on a little thing back here when I got to California, and she was in Houston, but that ended, and then a few years later, I got this email that said we have a daughter, and she's in Mexico, and you don't have to worry about her because I left her with Grandma, and I was like, that lady's still just as crazy as when I left her.
Nothing's changed.
Yeah. I just said, that's nice. Okay. Guess there's nothing to do. But then just a couple more years goes by, and she's like, well, now you got to send money down to Mexico because we got to put her into school and rah, rah, rah. And I was like, I'm not sending any money to Mexico without a test that says I have a person down there that's related to me. That's ridiculous. So I said, let's do this test, and a DNA test, and we'll work from there. And she was like, no, we can't do that. You'll try to take her. And I'm like, well, call me when you're ready.
Right.
So 3 months goes by, and then she's ready, and I'm like, okay. So I paid for the test, and then 3 months goes by after that, and I get this letter in the mail that said, the possibility that subject A is the parent of subject C was 99.6 more nines.
Yeah, and you know what a caliper is.
Yeah, as far as accuracy goes, whoa.
Yeah, moonshot.
Yeah, that one was like, oh gosh. So that's how I found out that I was a parent. I was like, oh goodness gracious, I'm a dad.
Right.
And it took a minute for that parental thing to kick in, because I got a hold of the grandmother, and I asked her how much her rent was, and I started paying her rent. She said it was $400 a month, and I was like, all right, here's $400 a month. So, but then things started to grow on me, and I was like, I got to know a little more about what are we doing here? Who is she? Rah, rah, rah.
Right.
So then finally I went down there to visit her, and then it really kicked in. And I was like, okay, this isn't working. I got to get her back home. And I can't have my daughter growing up in Mexico. I'm like, I live in Sonoma.
Right. It could be two different worlds.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, so I convinced the grandmother, and then I had the mom convinced, but the mom then told the grandmother that I was sleeping with her sister, and I never met her sister, but the grandmother then decided that I was immoral and I couldn't have her. And I was like, well, you realize that's gonna, you're gonna keep my daughter? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, there's gonna be repercussions for your choices. And she said, yeah, okay. So then I cut off the money. And then she emailed back and goes, where's your payment? And I said, I'm not making any payments. You said you want to keep her. She's your daughter. You raise her. I'm not going to be your bank account while you put your own morals in my daughter.
Right.
Yeah. So she finally came around and said, okay, you can have her. And I said, good. And then I had to track down the father, because the mother had put the ex-boyfriend on the birth certificate, and when he found out that it wasn't his kid, he ejected.
Right.
So I tracked him down, and I got a hold of him, and I convinced him that I wasn't trying to take anything from him, because he was like, I called him and said, I want to talk to you about Leela Allen, and he said, Leela's dead. And I was like, dead? No, she's not dead. She's in Mexico. Well, the mom told me she was dead. I said, well, the mom lied.
Wow.
She does that a lot.
Wow.
So I said, she's in Mexico. And he said, well, she's not my daughter. I said, I know she's not your daughter. She's my daughter. I want to get in your shoes. I don't know how many people say that to you. But
Right. Yeah.
I want to swap places with you. I want to be on the birth certificate. I want to have her. So I got him on board, and then I had to go to court, and I sued to be her legal guardian.
Wow.
And the judge granted it. Sole custody, legal guardianship, and it was a real conundrum, because in order to renew a passport for a U.S. minor in a foreign country, you got to have both parents on the birth certificate in the country at the embassy. I wasn't either one on paper, and her passport was expired, so I had to have strict legal permission to go down there as her legal guardian and renew it solo without any other parent, and I got it. So then I went down there and I renewed her passport, which in and of itself was a nightmare because I got to the embassy and I spent the whole day doing the thing, and then they said, okay, go ahead and go away, we'll come back at 4 o'clock, we'll have it ready for you. Well, while we were at a park, I got these phone calls from like Mississippi and someplace else. I'm like, I'm not answering that. I'm in Mexico. I don't know how these scammers are getting my phone number.
Right.
Turned out it was the embassy trying to call me because the paperwork that I'd given them was the one without this judge's signature. They had the court order and all that saying that I was the legal parent, but it wasn't the one that was certified.
Right.
So she had tried to call me to get it, and I went back at 4 o'clock, and she says, oh, I tried to call you. I'm like, oh, those were the missed calls.
Yeah, Mississippi.
Oh, shit. She says, I couldn't process it because you got to get me this paperwork. We're scheduled to leave the next morning on an airplane. So I said, I'll be right back. She said, you can make it? We're closing in 40 minutes. I said, I can make it. So I ran downstairs. I left everything. The people at the front gate were like, hey, you got stuff here. I said, keep it. I'm coming right back. And I ran. I don't know if you've ever run in Mexico City.
I've been to Mexico City, but yeah.
It's pretty high.
Yeah.
It's very elevated.
Yeah.
Running, not a good idea. But I ran my ass off. And I got to the hotel, ran up the stairs. I got the stuff. I came running back down. I got halfway back before I couldn't run anymore. I was out.
Right.
Like there was no way to draw breath.
Right.
And then I stopped. I walked as fast as I could until I could run again, and then I ran. I got back there, and the embassy's closing in 5 minutes, and the guard's like, we're closing. I said, I got my shit in there. I'm just trying to get this thing in. And then the girl, there was a woman behind there, and they said, oh, no, he's got his stuff up here. Let him in. So it's amazing how people step forward for you at critical moments in your life.
Right.
When you just don't know what's going to happen, and then they go, oh, no, that guy, let him in. He's got his stuff up here.
Right.
I
Just
ran
takes a little
past him.
compassion.
Yeah, and I went up the stairs. I knocked on the window, and the lady comes back. Oh, I didn't think you'd make it. I'm like, I'm here.
Yeah, right.
And then she goes, she processes and hands me, and I got her passport. I'm like, okay, I'm good.
Wow.
So then we go back, and I get the kid, and we stay the night in the hotel. We can't talk to each other because she speaks full Spanish, and I don't.
Right.
So we're using the phone to translate as best we can. But then we get up in the morning, and we go to the airport, and I'm thinking we're going to get out of here, and we wait, and I'm watching Frozen with her on the iPad, and then we go to board, and the lady asks for the little white visa paper, and I hand her mine, because you get one when you come into the country, and it says how long you're going to be there. Well, she asked for Leela's, and I don't have hers. She's been there over 5 years.
Right.
She doesn't have that piece of paper anymore.
Right.
Well, she doesn't have one, but I got her passport, and I bought her ticket. Oh, no, she can't get out of the country without that visa. You're going to go back to immigration. Like, immigration? Like, I got to go to yeah. I said, can I get back here and make this flight? She said, not a chance.
Wow.
I'm like, oh. So I had to go. I had a hell of a time just getting out of the terminal.
Right.
Because you had to go which way. I had to go back and forth 4 times before I actually got upset at somebody and said, I'm going through this way. You're going to have to stop me.
Yeah.
And I grabbed the kid and went, and then we got down to immigration, and they wanted 17 yards of paperwork, which I had. And then they said they couldn't give me the visa for her to leave until I had a flight. I said, I had a flight, but now I don't have a flight.
Right.
Well, you better book another flight. So now I'm trying to book another flight, but next weekend is Easter weekend, and the flights are all booked, and I don't have any internet. The guy actually had some compassion. He let me use his phone to log on to use it, and then I tried to book the flight, but I finally got it. I got 2 seats, and then he gets me my visa document for her to leave, and then I'm like, okay. And he says, you know what? There's a hotel here, so if you want to stay at the hotel, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going out into your world again. Right.
Yeah.
So we stayed at the hotel, and that's when Leela tried her first clash of wills.
Advanced dad.
Yeah. This is Dad in 10 minutes.
Yeah. I'm your new dad. Yeah. It's like second season where they change actors.
Yeah, and of course, when I booked the room at the hotel, the only one they had was this suite.
Right.
I mean, it's got a living room, it's got a kitchen, it's got a bedroom. It was not cheap.
Yeah,
it was the only one they had left,
Right. And as a new dad, you had to provide.
I just paid. It just let's go. But then when it was time to go to bed, she didn't want to go to bed, so I closed the door to the bedroom with me inside it, and her over there where her little sofa bed is. I said, "It's time. We got to go to sleep." And she didn't want it, so she started screaming. So I started to watch. I just started clocking it because I just wanted to see how long it would go. That girl went 16 minutes of screaming before she was hoarse and couldn't scream anymore. And I was
Jeez.
like, wow, that's a healthy set of lungs.
She's got some pipes. Yeah. She's got the Collins willpower.
She was 6 and she was strong. So finally she was done screaming and just looked at me and I said, "Okay, all right, now you know me, I know you. Let's go to bed."
And neither of you understood what you said. Yeah.
And then we had to get on the plane. It turned out that they had oversold the flight, and we didn't have seats.
Oh.
So we had to go through the terminal and wait, and then we got really lucky. Somebody finally just said, "Okay, we've got 2 extra seats," and I just got in there. And when we got on the plane, I was like, "Oh, thank God." And I thought that the drama was going to be over. But we landed, and then we're in SFO, and she's running crazy like kids do, and we got to go get our luggage, and then we got to go through our immigration, and the guy looks at me, and then he looks at her stuff, and he says, "Why is her last name different?" And I said, "Because..."
How much time do you have? You're like, how much time do you have for me to explain this?
And I started to pull out the documents, and he's like looking at the documents. I said, "It's my daughter, but I just got her. We're just coming home." And he's like, they're worried about child trafficking.
Sure.
So he looks at her, and he asks her, "Who is he?" And she looks up at me, and she says to him, "Me papi." And I was like, "Oh, thank God."
Right.
I thought I was going to go in the rubber room.
Right.
I was like, "Oh, kid, please don't horse around now."
Yeah.
And we got out of there, and she's been with me ever since.
Yeah. Great kid, by the way.
Yeah.
And
she learned English in 3 months.
no way.
Yeah.
Have you learned Spanish?
Not at all.
Not a bit. Not a
I
bit.
mean, I got some of it.
Right.
But we need to go back down there and submerge ourselves in it in order for me to get it. She'll
Sure.
have it as soon as she walks off the plane, but I need to get in there.
And how old is she now?
15.
15.
Yeah.
So 9 years. 'Cause
9 years.
I know, again, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. We kind of met around this time, and I remember when this story was unfolding, and it was like the first time we met you. "Oh, how you doing? How's your?" "Oh, no, I'm just doing my thing." And next thing you know, it's like, "Oh, I have a 6-year-old daughter." It's like, "You have a what?" He's like, "Yeah, I know. Same story. I had no idea either." So yeah. But I got to say, like, from afar, and also being a father, like seeing the daughter that you've raised under the circumstances, it seems like you've fallen into the right rut of how to do it.
My family seems to say the same thing. They said, "You changed." I said, "I don't know. I don't feel like I changed, but I definitely turned a corner and never went anywhere else. It was that direction, and that's the way to go."
No, I got to, again, hats off and cheers to you for doing the right thing through all that. I can't imagine, I just, being a father, being a parent, I just can't imagine the shoe being on the other foot of somebody who just says, "I'm out of here." This isn't my responsibility. Like, that's just not
bizarre,
built.
Isn't it?
It's not built in my DNA, and so
it didn't fit for me either.
Yeah. Well, cheers to you, and that's awesome. So once you finished in Washington, you went into the Coast Guard, or you worked for the Coast Guard? How's that all?
Washington, I went to the VA.
Yeah, that's right.
And then from the VA, I went to Social Security, and I did their stuff. And then that's when I found a job, because that's when I got my daughter.
Right.
In the middle of working that Social Security job.
Yeah.
And I was working nights, and I couldn't work nights and be a single dad. I was like, "Oh, shit." So I started looking for a job, and I found a job at the Coast Guard out there, Trace and Petaluma.
Gotcha.
Doing their air conditioning, refrigeration, mostly heating. They don't have a lot of air conditioning. It's Petaluma.
Right.
But it's all the same. You're just moving BTUs from one place to another. So
it's just all ball bearings, BTUs from one place to the other.
Yeah. There's no such thing as cold.
Right.
There is only heat. But I applied, and I didn't get it at first. They picked somebody else. It turned out that I had done the wrong thing. The guy who came from there was working at Social Security with me, and I put him down on my resume. I asked him, "Hey man, can I use you as a reference?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." I didn't know that he had totally pissed off the chain of command at the base. And so when they went to do the interviews, that lady saw that guy's name on my resume.
Yoink!
I got the interview, but I did not get picked.
Right.
I placed second. Well, they gave it to somebody, and then that guy failed to pull through. He dropped out. So then they called me back and said, we need you to reapply because we're going to reopen the position. So I reapplied, and then they went ahead and picked me. And
Right.
I've been at Social Security.
Yeah, I gotta tell you.
I mean, Coast Guard.
Yeah, Coast Guard. One of the things that I'm very thankful for, I would say, is that I have turned the wolf onto a couple of my friends that you have helped them, and I can't tell you how many pinches they tell me all the time. They said, man, I'm so glad you told me about the wolf, but my good friend Henley at One House Bakery in Benicia, and
love that place.
Even Justin here on the podcast, he was telling us, he said he was editing the episode where we were talking about our colorful characters, and we had talked about the wolf, and he was having some issues with his refrigeration, and he's doing his job of trying to edit our episode, and then he's out like at Hop Grenade and hearing everybody talk about like this refrigeration's down. He's like, God, I got to figure out this refrigeration. And then he's like, wait a minute, I just keep hearing this name, the wolf. I got to get a hold of the wolf. And so he texted me and told me about it. And he's like, man, is there any way you can turn me on to the wolf? And sounds like things have been working out well there for us.
Yes, I like that guy. He's a good guy.
Yeah, he is a good guy, of course. So go ahead.
Yeah, that's now I have you turned me on to One House.
Yeah.
And now I've done jobs for the pizza across the street.
Oh yeah,
They contacted them and said we needed somebody.
Right.
And so the pizza place across the street, Pacifica Pizza, and then they turned me on to the Mexican place down the street.
Yeah.
Can't think of their names at the moment, but people keep talking.
Yeah, and it sounds like too, like Justin was trying to get rid of a piece of equipment that you then got a hold of the Pacifica Pizza, and then was able to, within 15 minutes,
it was gone.
Yeah, it was gone. It's funny, I passed by and I've seen it, and I was like, I know where that came from. But
it's an interesting network.
It keeps
growing.
It's a great network, and again, it goes all the way back to the reason why you have a tank named after you here is that you're good people, you do great work, and it's one of the things that if you're starting a brewery and if you're in the restaurant industry, you know that your refrigeration guy is maybe one of the most important people that you have. And the one thing that I haven't had to do in 9.5 years is try to figure out how to replace this guy that's not doing his work, because you do your work and over and beyond. Like, I mean, you've even hung glycol lines for us. You've plumbed tanks before. When I needed somebody to plumb a tank on the fly.
Jobs I'd never done before.
Yeah.
Said, let's do it.
But you know what? Your can-do attitude and your always positivity, always whistling something and always having some kind of song in there, because music is clearly a very massive passion in your life. Like,
it makes my day go by.
Yeah.
I love it.
Top 5 bands. I don't know, just cause.
Led Zeppelin, Mark Knopfler. I would want to throw in U2, but honestly, it's just U2's Joshua Tree.
Okay,
And Pryor.
That's fair.
Yeah. Let's see. Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
Oh, can I toss in Sting?
You got to throw it. I mean, why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Please don't stand so close to me. I mean, come on.
Right.
Funny story on that one. I'll just end it on this one here. When you mentioned Sting, when I was living in Manhattan Beach, I was waiting tables down there, and I had this pretty affluent couple that would come in, and the guy, he ran some kind of tech company that ended up selling to Microsoft for multi-millions of dollars, and they were set. And his wife was this Indian descent, extremely beautiful, like 6'5" model of a female, and she was telling me a story one time how she was out one night with all of her model friends, and they were at the bar, and Sting was standing next to them, and he was fancying one of the girls, this top hot blonde model or whatever, and he started talking to her, and she said, "I will never forget," she says, and I still tell her to this day, she turned to him, she goes, "Sting, please don't stand so close to me." And I just literally said, like, how do you do that? Like, how do you have the balls? It was pretty good on the fly. Yeah, you got to punch it. And so glad you brought up Sting, because I love that story. Always, yeah.
Oh, and Train. I really love Train.
Train, yeah, no, that's true. Your Drops of Jupiter do run through the halls.
I like to go on their train cruise. That's a good time.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, this has been a great cruise, and I hope the relationship continues, which I have no doubt it will.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate everything you've done for the brewing company and everything you've done to the friends as well. But for those of you out there, if you don't have a wolf, you're doing it wrong. You got to. If you need some help, you need somebody to do it. And so, cheers to you, sir, and to everyone out there. Hey, thanks for listening. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and the wolf maybe get a little howl on the way out.